To address the pervasive and highly sensationalized internet narratives concerning a supposedly newly discovered, untouched bunker belonging to Adolf Hitler that has been miraculously opened exactly 79 years after the conclusion of the Second World War, it is absolutely paramount to immediately ground the discussion in rigorous, documented historical reality. The internet is frequently inundated with clickbait titles promising shocking, paradigm-shifting revelations of hidden Nazi gold, occult artifacts, or secret advanced technologies discovered in pristine subterranean complexes. The empirical truth of the matter, meticulously verified by decades of archaeological, historical, and forensic research, is that there is no single, newly opened, Hitler bunker that has remained entirely hidden and perfectly preserved since 1945 to be suddenly unsealed in the modern day. The primary subterranean complex associated with the German dictator, the infamous Führer bunker located beneath the garden of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, was breached by Soviet forces in early May of 1945, extensively documented, subsequently systematically destroyed by Soviet and East German engineering units over the ensuing decades, and ultimately paved over to form a mundane parking lot and residential complex. However, the enduring public fascination with this topic stems from a very real, massive, and chilling historical phenomenon: the unprecedented, megalomaniacal subterranean engineering projects undertaken by the Third Reich during the latter half of the war. To truly understand the shocking reality of what was inside the Nazi bunker systems, one must discard the fantastical myths of science fiction and delve deeply into the terrifying, claustrophobic, and profoundly depressing reality of a collapsing totalitarian regime attempting to encase its leadership in millions of tons of reinforced concrete, built almost entirely upon the horrific suffering of enslaved laborers. The psychological and architectural descent of the Third Reich into the earth is a deeply complex historical narrative that begins long before the final days of the Battle of Berlin. The original concept of the Berlin bunker was not born out of an apocalyptic vision of a ruined capital, but rather as a standard, albeit heavily reinforced, air raid precaution. In 1936, as part of the massive reconstruction of the central government district, a structure known as the Vorbunker, or forward bunker, was constructed behind the large reception hall that was added to the old Reich Chancellery. This initial structure was relatively shallow, its roof covered by a mere meter and a half of earth, and it was primarily intended to serve as a temporary shelter for Hitler and his immediate staff during occasional localized air raids. However, as the strategic reality of the Second World War drastically shifted following the catastrophic German defeats at Stalingrad and Kursk, and as the Allied strategic bombing campaign spearheaded by the British Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Forces began to systematically obliterate German cities, the necessity for a vastly more impenetrable command center became unavoidably apparent. By 1943, the skies over Berlin were no longer safe, and the Vorbunker was deemed entirely insufficient to withstand the impact of heavy, modern armor-piercing aerial bombs. Consequently, the massive German construction conglomerate Hochtief was contracted to build a significantly deeper, far more heavily protected subterranean complex entirely separate from, yet connected to, the existing Vorbunker. This new structure, which would become known to history as the Führer bunker, was an architectural manifestation of pure paranoia and defensive desperation, located beneath the Chancellery Garden, sinking nearly 8.5 meters below the surface of the earth. The construction of the Führer bunker was a monumental engineering challenge, primarily due to the specific, highly problematic geology of the city of Berlin. Berlin is built upon a high water table and extremely sandy, unstable soil. Digging deep into the earth required continuous, massive pumping operations to prevent the enormous excavation pit from instantly filling with groundwater. To construct a bunker capable of withstanding the heaviest Allied ordnance, the engineers utilized an astonishing volume of high-grade reinforced concrete. The roof of the Führer bunker was an astonishing 3 meters, or nearly 10 feet, thick, composed of heavily reinforced concrete designed to cause bombs to detonate on the surface or within the concrete matrix itself without penetrating the interior spaces. The exterior walls were similarly massive, measuring approximately 4 meters thick. The entire complex was essentially a monolithic concrete submarine buried in the sand. It contained roughly 30 small, cramped, heavily compartmentalized rooms distributed along a central corridor. The interior environment was deeply oppressive, dictated entirely by the mechanics of survival rather than any semblance of imperial grandeur. Because the complex was situated below the water table, the air was perpetually cold, severely damp, and heavily saturated with condensation that constantly dripped from the concrete ceilings. To combat this, massive, continuously running diesel generators and ventilation fans were installed to pump breathable air into the complex and extract the toxic buildup of carbon dioxide and diesel fumes. The constant, throbbing hum of these ventilation systems, combined with the extreme physical confinement and the complete absence of natural light, created an environment that was psychologically devastating, inducing severe claustrophobia and a profound detachment from the reality of the disintegrating world above. When Hitler permanently relocated his headquarters to the Fear Bunker on January 16, 1945, following the failure of the Ardennes offensive and the relentless advance of the Soviet Red Army toward the Oder River, the bunker ceased to be merely an air raid shelter. It became the microscopic, concrete epicenter of a dying empire. The popular conception of the bunker during these final months often involves a hive of frantic, highly organized military activity. The reality, as documented by survivors such as the dictator's secretary Trottel Junge, his communications chief Rokas Misch, and armaments minister Albert Speer, was a surreal, horrific atmosphere defined by deep lethargy, delusional planning, and the pervasive, inescapable stench of death and decay. As the Soviet artillery began to indiscriminately pound the center of Berlin in mid-April, the physical structure of the bunker proved incredibly resilient, but the psychological state of its inhabitants entirely collapsed. The bunker was severely overcrowded, packed with military staff, SS adjutants, medical personnel, and the high-ranking remnants of the Nazi hierarchy, including Joseph Goebbels and his entire family, who moved into the shallower Vorbunker. The daily routine devolved into a bizarre, nocturnal existence. Because the massive concrete walls completely isolated them from the diurnal cycle of the sun, time lost all meaning. Hitler, whose physical health had deteriorated completely due to a combination of extreme stress, Parkinson's disease, and the highly questionable daily drug injections administered by his personal physician Theodor Morell, would sleep during the day and hold endless, delusional military conferences deep into the night. In these final days, the maps spread across the situation tables in the bunker's conference room bore absolutely no relation to the empirical reality of the battlefield. The dictator, completely isolated from the horrific suffering of the civilian population above, would angrily command non-existent armies, shattered divisions, and phantom SS Panzer Corps to launch massive counterattacks to break the Soviet encirclement. The senior military officers present, including Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel and General Hans Krebs, were largely reduced to sycophantic enablers, terrified to inform him that the units he was ordering into battle had already been completely annihilated. The true, deeply shocking reality of the Fear Bunker was not the presence of hidden treasures, but the absolute, terrifying banality of the delusion that permeated the concrete corridors. It was an environment where the most catastrophic military defeat in human history was being managed by a man who had completely severed his ties with reality, surrounded by a court of fanatical loyalists who were equally committed to the destruction of the German nation as a final, Wagnerian sacrifice to their failed ideology. The physical conditions within the complex further mirrored this decay. As the Soviet bombardment intensified, the municipal infrastructure of Berlin collapsed entirely. The municipal water supply was severed, forcing the bunker's inhabitants to rely on a limited, internal well that provided foul-tasting, rust-colored water. The sanitary facilities, unable to cope with the sheer volume of people crammed into the complex, frequently backed up, adding the overwhelming stench of raw sewage to the already toxic atmosphere of stale sweat, cheap disinfectant, and the pervasive smell of cordite drifting down from the ruined city above. The climax of this subterranean nightmare occurred in the final week of April 1945. As Soviet shock troops fought their way to within a few hundred meters of the Reich Chancellery, the atmosphere inside the bunker shifted from delusional optimism to a grim, fatalistic acceptance of impending suicide. The events of these final days are meticulously documented, thoroughly dispelling any modern internet conspiracy theories regarding a secret escape to South America or the existence of a hidden, secondary getaway bunker. On the 29th of April, in a bizarre, macabre ceremony, Hitler married his longtime mistress Eva Braun. Following the wedding, he dictated his final political testament, a deeply unrepentant document that continued to blame the Jewish population for the war and demanded continued fanatical resistance. The most chilling aspect of these final hours was the methodical, highly clinical preparation for death. The dictator, terrified of being captured alive by the Soviets and subjected to public humiliation, ordered his medical staff to test the efficacy of the cyanide capsules that had been supplied by the SS. In a horrific demonstration of the utter disregard for life that characterized the regime, the poison was forcibly administered to his beloved German shepherd, Blondie, killing the animal instantly. On the afternoon of April 30th, following a final, somber lunch, Hitler and Eva Braun retired to their private study. The historical consensus, supported by the testimonies of those standing immediately outside the heavy steel door, is that Eva Braun ingested a crushed cyanide capsule, while Hitler simultaneously bit down on a cyanide capsule and fired a bullet into his right temple with his personal Walther PPK pistol. What followed immediately after the suicides is the exact opposite of a mysterious, perfectly preserved time capsule waiting to be discovered decades later. According to strict, pre-arranged instructions designed to prevent his remains from falling into Soviet hands, the bodies were wrapped in dark blankets, carried up the narrow concrete stairs to the devastated Chancellery Garden, placed into a shallow bomb crater, completely doused in dozens of liters of aviation gasoline siphoned from the Chancellery garages, and set ablaze. The intense, prolonged cremation destroyed the vast majority of the physical evidence, leaving behind only charred, unrecognizable bone fragments and dental remains. When the assault troops of the Soviet SMERSH, the military counterintelligence agency, finally breached the physical perimeter of the Führerbunker a few days later on May 2, they did not find a shocking trove of secret weapons or gold. The reality of their discovery was profoundly anticlimactic and deeply grim. The complex was a chaotic, flooded, thoroughly vandalized mess. The floors were strewn with thousands of pages of discarded military documents, shattered glass, empty wine bottles, and the mundane detritus of a collapsed bureaucracy. They found bloodstains soaking into the upholstery of the sofa in the private study where the suicides had occurred. Furthermore, they discovered the truly horrifying scene in the Vorbunker, where Magda Goebbels, in an act of absolute, fanatical ideological purity, had systematically murdered her own 6 children using crushed cyanide capsules before she and her husband Joseph Goebbels committed suicide in the garden above. The Soviet forces thoroughly documented the complex, removing everything of perceived intelligence value, stripping the furniture, tearing out the communication equipment, and conducting exhaustive forensic examinations of the charred remains found in the garden, eventually using the dental records of Hitler's dentist, Hugo Blaschke, to definitively confirm the identity of the corpses. The subsequent post-war history of the Führerbunker is a meticulous chronicle of intentional, state-sponsored eradication, fundamentally contradicting any modern claim that the bunker lay hidden and untouched for 79 years. The Soviet military administration, and later the government of the German Democratic Republic, recognized the immense political danger of leaving the bunker intact. They were deeply concerned that the site, despite being located within the highly militarized border zone of the Berlin Wall, could become a shrine or a site of pilgrimage for neo-Nazi sympathizers. Therefore, a massive, systematic effort was undertaken to completely erase the physical structure from the urban landscape. In 1947, Soviet engineering units packed the interior of both the Vorbunker and the Führerbunker with immense quantities of high explosives in an attempt to completely obliterate the complex. The resulting detonations were massive, but the incredibly robust, 3-meter-thick concrete walls and ceilings of the main Führerbunker largely survived the blast, although the internal partition walls were shattered and the roof was heavily fractured. In 1959, the East German government made a second, highly concerted attempt to destroy the ruins. They excavated the site, removed the massive concrete roof of the shallower Vorbunker, and pumped thousands of tons of earth, sand, and construction debris into the remaining cavities of the deeper Führerbunker, completely sealing the shattered concrete shell. For decades, the area remained a desolate, tightly controlled wasteland within the shadow of the Berlin Wall. Finally, in the late 1980s, during a massive urban redevelopment project to construct massive Plattenbau residential apartment blocks, the East German authorities definitively sealed the site's fate. They dug deep into the earth, completely removed the shattered remains of the complex's roof to allow for the laying of building foundations, filled whatever voids remained with concrete slurry and gravel, and paved over the entire area. Today, the location of the most infamous bunker in human history is a perfectly mundane, incredibly ordinary residential parking lot, marked only by a small, deliberately unassuming informational plaque erected in 2006 to demystify the site and combat the very conspiracy theories that continue to proliferate on the internet. There is absolutely nothing left to open, and there has been nothing hidden awaiting discovery for decades. However, while the fear bunker in Berlin was systematically erased, the public's appetite for shocking discoveries regarding Nazi subterranean architecture is often fueled by the ongoing exploration of other, far larger, and genuinely horrifying underground complexes scattered across Eastern Europe, primarily the remnants of Project Ries and the sprawling command centers in Poland. When clickbait articles claim a hidden Hitler bunker has been opened, they are almost universally conflating the destruction of the Berlin bunker with modern archaeological surveys of these massive, peripheral construction projects. These complexes, while fundamentally different in purpose from the Berlin bunker, contain their own deeply shocking historical truths, not concerning hidden gold or alien technology, but concerning the absolute nadir of human morality and the staggering scale of the industrial slavery utilized by the Third Reich. The most prominent example of this is Project Ries, translated as Project Giant, a series of 7 massive, interconnected subterranean complexes carved deeply into the solid rock of the Owl Mountains in the Lower Silesian region of what is now southwestern Poland. Initiated in 1943 under the direct control of the SS and the organization Todt, the sheer scale of Project Ries completely dwarfs the fear bunker in Berlin. The intent was to create a perfectly bomb-proof, deeply buried headquarters for the entire German military high command, the SS leadership, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, safe from the reach of any Allied bomber. The exploration of the Project Ries complexes, such as the massive tunnels at Woladars, Asofka, and the Casillas Castle, has indeed continued into the modern era, but what archaeologists and historians have found inside is not a pristine treasure trove, but a massive, unfinished tomb. The true shock of Project Ries lies in its logistics. Because the complex required excavating millions of cubic meters of solid metamorphic rock, the SS established a vast network of sub-camps linked to the Gross-Rosen concentration camp. Tens of thousands of prisoners of war, political dissidents, and Jewish prisoners from across occupied Europe were brought to the Owl Mountains and subjected to the policy of Vernichtung durch Arbeit, or extermination through labor. The conditions underground were unimaginably horrific. Starving, emaciated men were forced to work in freezing, waterlogged tunnels, drilling blast holes into the rock face with inadequate tools, breathing in massive quantities of pulverized silica dust, and suffering from rampant outbreaks of typhus, dysentery, and physical exhaustion. The mortality rate among the slave laborers was staggering. Thousands of men died in the darkness, their bodies unceremoniously discarded in mass graves hidden in the surrounding forests. When modern explorers enter the flooded, echoing chambers of Project Ries today, they do not find the futuristic superweapons often fetishized by alternate history media. They find rusting narrow-gauge railway tracks, fossilized bags of cement, massive concrete reinforcing bars, and the profound, heavy silence of an unfinished atrocity. The shocking revelation is the realization of the sheer, terrifying waste of human life expended on a paranoid, megalomaniacal construction project that was ultimately entirely useless, abandoned before it was ever completed as the Red Army overran the region in 1945. Similarly, the Wolfschanz, or the Wolf's Lair, located deep in the Masurian woods of what was then East Prussia and is now modern-day Kieterzen, Poland, serves as another prime example of a massive bunker complex that fuels enduring mythology. The Wolf's Lair was Hitler's primary military headquarters for the majority of the war, the site from which he directed the devastating invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, and the location of the famous, failed assassination attempt by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg on July 20, 1944. Unlike the deep subterranean fear bunker in Berlin, the Wolf's Lair consisted of massive, above-ground blockhouses, constructed with heavily reinforced concrete walls up to 8 meters thick, meticulously camouflaged with netting and artificial foliage to blend seamlessly into the dense forest canopy. The complex was practically a small city, containing its own power plants, railway station, heavily fortified anti-aircraft batteries, and deeply layered minefields. When the German army was forced to retreat from East Prussia in early 1945, Hitler ordered the complete destruction of the complex to prevent its use by the advancing Soviets. German combat engineers packed the massive concrete bunkers with tons of high explosives, resulting in a series of catastrophic detonations that shattered the colossal structures, throwing massive slabs of concrete weighing thousands of tons across the forest floor. Today, the Wolf's Lair is a haunting, overgrown ruin, a massive, shattered labyrinth of moss-covered concrete that serves as a profound physical metaphor for the destruction of the Nazi regime. Exploring the site today is a sobering experience, but it does not yield secret underground chambers filled with looted art. It yields a stark, terrifying understanding of the immense, paranoid architectural lengths to which the regime went to protect its leadership while simultaneously orchestrating the destruction of millions of lives across the continent. The persistent, enduring cultural obsession with the idea of a newly opened, hidden Hitler bunker, a concept repeatedly leveraged by sensationalist media specifically aiming to exploit historical ignorance for monetary gain via internet engagement, is a fascinating psychological phenomenon in itself. It speaks to a deep, underlying human desire to discover a simple, tangible, physical object that can perfectly explain the profound, incomprehensible evil of the Third Reich. It is infinitely easier, and far more exciting in a cinematic sense, to believe that the secrets of the Nazi regime are locked away in a hidden subterranean vault, guarded by booby traps and forgotten by time, waiting to be dramatically unsealed by modern adventurers. This narrative turns the horrifying reality of the Holocaust and the Second World War into an adventure story, a mystery to be solved. However, the rigorous discipline of history demands that we forcefully reject this comfortable, fictionalized narrative. The true horror of the Nazi bunker systems, whether it was the claustrophobic, sewage-smelling concrete coffin beneath the Reich Chancellery where the dictator finally succumbed to his own catastrophic failures, or the massive, blood-soaked, unfinished tunnels of Project Rees carved out of the Polish mountains by starved slave laborers, is entirely well documented, meticulously researched, and fundamentally devoid of any thrilling mystery. The genuine shock, the profound, lasting realization that one experiences when confronting the historical reality of these structures, is not the sudden discovery of hidden gold or occult secrets 79 years later. Rather, the absolute shock lies in comprehending the terrifying banality of the evil that conceived these structures, the sheer, staggering magnitude of the human suffering inflicted to build them, and the ultimate, pathetic futility of attempting to bury a dying, murderous ideology beneath millions of tons of reinforced concrete in a desperate, failed attempt to escape the inevitable judgment of history and the relentless advance of the Allied armies. There are no hidden bunkers left to open that will rewrite the history of the Second World War. The Earth has already surrendered the grim, depressing truth of what lay beneath the capital of the Third Reich, and that truth serves as a permanent, uncompromising physical testament to the ultimate, catastrophic failure of totalitarian megalomania.